infallibility of Vedas is a crucial cornerstone for existence of Hindu civilization.
Yes, absolutely.
But the infallibility of Vedas is being attacked in the name of Hindu civilization to move ahead. That अगर हमें आगे बढ़ना है तो let's say for example कि वर्ण जाति व्यवस्था खत्म करनी है, बट वर्ण जाति व्यवस्था का बेसिक कहाँ से इन्फ्लुएंस आता है, वो वैदिक वांग्मय से आता है. या फिर हिंदू जो है वो एक धर्म नहीं है, हिंदू एक जाति है. So सबका डीएनए एक जो आजकल जो आर्गुमेंट है, that argument is basically in opposition to the infallibility of the religion.
Yes.
Religion is indeed fallible, and that is why we need to ethnicize the population.
Yes. And the tradition says, the Vedic tradition says that birth is that right. कोई किसी भी तरह भी द्विजाति या वेदाधिकारी नहीं बनाया जा सकता. A lot of Hindus would be interested or inclined, or maybe not even capable of grasping the philosophical, because everyone does not have, I'm not saying this in a patronizing way, but not everyone is philosophically inclined. All the Hindus who go gaga over Shoinsh, I must congratulate them that yes, there is a scientific view in the traditionalists also. I mean, between the traditionalist side and the rebel side, that debate can always will continue forever, because that is the nature of reasoning. There will never be a finality. आपने कितना भी अच्छा कोई तर्क दे दिया, उससे अच्छा तर्क अगला दे देगा. इसमें कोई मुश्किल नहीं है. But so if it is just based on tark, which is reasoning, then you have what is called modernity, where there is nothing final. And today in the propaganda society, you even have efforts by institutions, respectable institutions, to normalize degenerate behavior like pedophilia.
So finally, we are here with the second episode of Dharma 101, and thank you, Ashish, for being, a co-host with us and your valuable time. So in this episode, we are going to explore more about the infinite and eternal nature of the Vedic parampara, and why it is distinct and complete in itself, a system. And that's why it cannot be compared to other traditions, both secular and religious, in its own right.
Right. And also there is this very strong movement in modern times, which is some sort of a rationalist movement, which denies this eternality of the Veda, because it seems like a very foolish idea to some, that how can a text be eternal? How can it have no human authorship? We touched upon this aspect of tradition in the last episode, and even the comments on our video reflected that bias or that view, that this is an unscientific belief and all that. But I think that it is important to remind people that philosophy transcends science. And science is a method. It's a method of observation and coming to conclusion. And it's always, it's shifting frontiers. But philosophy is speculative, and philosophy is also uses everything available at its disposal to give a semblance of order and meaning to human existence and to existence in general. And that is why the ancients were so adept at philosophy, and they spent so much time in these what would now be called unproductive activities. And there is a remarkable degree of congruence between these ancient ideas of various cultures also. And a lot of cultures make similar claims. So again, one of the things that is often brought up is how does it make us different then? If we also believe that our foundational scripture is not human authored, then it is the same as Asmani Kitab of some other people. Right? Now that shouldn't bother us actually. First of all, it is not really a scripture in that sense. It is a whole tradition. It is a way of learning. It is a system of knowledge. It is a parampara, right? And having it written down, whether it is on manuscripts or by the printing press or now on digitally on PDFs, is just one of the mediums on which it is recorded. The parampara is abstract. The parampara is beyond materiality. So to confuse that and say that you reduce it to just a book is foolishness. And that is why I think there is so much confusion about this aspect.
Right. So hypothetically, let's say a meteor hits Earth and somehow all of the physical manuscripts are completely vanished from the planet and only digital PDFs remain. So many would claim after, let's say, 400-500 years that Vedas originated in 2019 or 2024 because the earliest evidence of Rig Veda.pdf they found was from 2024.
Correct.
But the parampara precedes the medium of instruction.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So how far can we stretch the parampara back to? Like, who is the primordial giver of the tradition?
No, the tradition comes from eternality. That is the claim of the tradition, that it is beginningless and it is authorless. And as we discuss further and unpack this, I think we should be able to do some justice to this line of thought. Why is it eternal and why is it supposed to be authorless? What implications that has on the practice of religion itself, on how we conceive Dharmic principles, Dharmic values, and the praxis thereof. And for example, why is there no evangelism in the Vedic Dharma? You know, that actually comes from this this foundational belief. So that is one. So before we move further, why don't you first give us an overview of this whole Vedic Vangmay, what all it constitutes? Because people tend to reduce it to, not many, but a lot of people still believe that it is just some books here and there, like rigveda.pdf, famously popularized by our friend Halley. And so it is not, it is not just those few verses. What is it all about?
Right. So before proceeding, I just want to add a little caveat that we are not authority on Dharmic literature by any means. And we have earlier also mentioned about this, but this is a very inquisitive nature of a conversation happening between us. We could be wrong on many counts. And since we are dealing with a technical subject this time, so we request the humble.
जैसे anticipatory bail होता है, हम anticipatory apology पहले ही दे देते हैं that whatever we are saying, we are trying our best to derive whatever we are saying from sources of authority, from very high sources of authority, and from the writings of great sages like Swami Karpatri Maharaj. But we could still be wrong in understanding a few things, and we would like to apologize to the tradition first and then to the people if we have conveyed something wrong. But our endeavor will be that we don't do that. We don't go beyond our limited understanding of things, and we stay within limits. Yeah.
So the Vedic Vangmay basically deals with the corpus of the Vedas, and by that extension, the Itihasa, Puranas, Agama, Nigama, and Dharma Shastras. So if we try to decode the structure of the Vedas, we have we can put the bundles of shlokas into single unit known as mandalas. So every Vedas are divided into a pack of mandals. So Rig Veda, for example, has 10 mandals. So now every mandal is further classified into 4 parts, which is, of course, the aspects of practice or samhita, the Aranyaka, the Brahmana, and the end of the Vedas, Vedanta or Upanishad. And when after this classification, the entire Vedic Vangmay is also divided on the basis of the usage of its practice, which is the Vedangas. So there are 6 limbs or the 6 parts of the Vedas, which is the Vedangas. These are,
Kalpa,
Siksha, Nirukta, Vyakaran, and Jyotish.
Yeah.
I think there are 6. So if I'm not wrong, from the Mundak Upanishad, it has been stated that the parts of the Veda or the Vedanga are the 6 limbs of the Vedas, through which the Vedas exercise its authority in different spaces.
Right.
And why this shloka is important, I'll come back to it later, but that's how it has been structured. So this is this feature of Veda is important to know, because Vedas claim themselves to be eternal, beginningless, and distinct in itself, complete. So the Vedic corpus is anadi. It does not have any beginning nor end. It is as good as reflection of the Ishvara himself. So there are many instances in the Vedas itself that state the reference of the historical events, which are mentioned in the Itihasas and Puranas. And historically, they have been placed much after the physical evolution of the Vedas, for example. So if we go by the historical standards, first we have the Vedic age, and then the high Upanishadic era. Then we have Itihasas and Puranas. But the episodes of Puranas, the episodes of Ramayana, have been mentioned in Rig Veda itself. So that shows that the entirety of the Vedic corpus is distinct in itself. It is free from the prapanch of the worldly affairs, and it does not have any external sources to acculturate any sources of knowledge.
Right.
So that's the basic.
Yeah. So the mention of events or personalities that come much later in what is accepted as history is a very peculiar aspect of the Vedic literature. And obviously, if you look at it from a purely rational standpoint, and a historiographer would, if they have to consider how it came to be, the most obvious and the most, I would say, pedestrian explanation is that it is interpolated, that it came later, someone came and changed the thing. But the tradition itself is quite clear about these things, and it says that what is mentioned in the Veda, and whether it is in the form of geography, let's say there is a mention of Saraswati River. So that mentioning is not on account of the Veda being composed in a given geography and the author describing those events, but the claim is huge. The claim is that this is all recorded as something that it's not a prophecy, but you have to understand the nature of Shabda Pramana to make sense of this claim. It says that whatever, and this is very close to, I was telling you about the Greek philosophers. So names do not happen like that. Names are actually the forms themselves. And this is true even for, the practice. When you practice mantra sadhana, you go to the tantras, they'll say the devta and the mantra are the same. So this idea is pretty universal among the ancient pagan civilizations. And although I'm not very familiar with Greek thought, but this is something that I'm reasonably aware of, that this is how it is. And so if you look at that aspect, that there is a higher reality and the names are derived from that, then it is very easily explainable that whatever is happening on earth, that is already somewhere in the higher realm. So given the eternality and the beginninglessness of the Veda, there is the mention of these places and these characters and these even animals is not because it was written after observation, but that it was already there. It is eternally existent. Like you have Kashi, which is an eternal city. Kashi already exists always. It's an eternal place, and what you see today is a manifestation of that eternality. So it's the same idea.
It's very similar to the nature of karma kanda related to human lives. That says that our bodies, our fates are a result of prarabdha of previous lives.
Right.
So all of the geographical explanations given in the Vedas, they actually are I don't know, the explanation of the geography given from a very metaphysical point of view,
Right.
that these places already exist and now they have been described. It's almost as if they knew about
Correct.
them in first hand.
Correct.
So
No, and it's also, I mean, if you look at it from a more or a less philosophical lens, why does it have to be that the Vedas, when they mention a particular geography or describe a particular river and name it so and so, why can't the people who live there take inspiration from the Vedic text and name their place according to that? I mean, there is no way to find out, right? You can argue endlessly, and that actually is the core contention that the tradition makes with respect to the prioritization of the pramanas. So anyway,
what do you think makes the Vedic tradition exceptional in that case? If all of the pagan traditions had this kind of awareness with relation to the metaphysics.
No, I don't. I didn't say that everyone had that kind of awareness. I said that a lot of pagan traditions had, especially the ones who were given to philosophizing, who were more culturally advanced, that they had their own philosophical systems of thought. They seem to converge on this principle. But there were many pagan cultures, where such speculation was not part of the culture. I don't think that, the North American or the South American Native Americans, I don't know if they had such a vast philosophical literature available to them, or whether their ancestors had gone through the same kind of thought process. So we can't say. I mean, at least I don't know. So I'm not making that claim. I'm just saying that there seems to be convergence between these major streams of thought, Indian and the Greco-Roman,
the ancient world.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have tried to address the nature of Vedic traditions as anadi, or the beginninglessness, and then it precedes and it succeeds the existence of physical world. That is for sure. What now? Why are we even discussing about it?
Right. So no, before we move further, I think we'll reserve this question.
Okay, sure.
So before we move further, I think it is important to first establish the why the tradition calls the Shabda Pramana as the supreme Pramana. And different schools of Hindu thought have a different cycle of a different set of Pramanas. And Pramanas are basically sources of authority. And so these sources of authority vary from one school to another. Their order also varies, and their order of importance. But the Astika schools all believe in the supremacy of the Veda. That this is the Vedic statement is a pramana, or is an independent source of authority on its own. Some schools do not believe in the eternality of the Veda, that the fact that there is no human authorship, like the Nyayikas and the Vaisheshikas. They don't believe in that. But they still hold Veda as the supreme authority, while the Mimamsakas and the Uttar Mimamsakas, the Vedantins, they certainly believe that the Veda is Apaurusheya, meaning there is no human authorship. So while there are so many different pramanas, I think the pramanas can be clubbed together in three basic categories. One is the Shabda Pramana, which is the Shruti, which is the Vedic corpus. Then you have Yukti, which is a combination of various kinds of reasoning, most importantly Anumana. And then you have Pratyaksh Pramana, which can be clubbed with other forms of experience and labeled as Anubhav. So you have Yukti, Anubhav and Shabda Pramana. Right? So the Vedic tradition holds that the Shabda Pramana is supreme. Because your reasoning is never final. And this happens to be a scientific view. All the Hindus who go gaga over Shoinsh all the time, I must congratulate them that yes, there is a scientific view in the traditionalists also, which says that reasoning is never final. And reasoning also happens to be tainted by biases. If you read any modern, scientific work on human psychology, behavioralism, people like, what's his name?
C.V. Hung.
Who?
Hung.
Achha, Jung. Jung ne. Jung to is, of course, he's more into transcendental psychology, transpersonal and all that. But I'm talking about just behavioral economics, for example.
Richard Thaler.
And then there is this book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Daniel Kahneman. So if you read their works, you realize the profundity of the statement that reasoning can never be final, because there are biases in every single thing we say and do. Regardless of who we are, where we are, how intelligent, how high IQ we may be, we are all afflicted by biases all the time, right? And actually our biases are who we are. Our personality is a bias, right? So if it is a human authorship, then it has to be necessarily biased. And Pratyaksha, as in Anubhav and directly sensory experience, on its own, it cannot be the final pramana, because you may have a defective organ, your nerve may be cut. So does that mean that you have no access to knowledge? And you have no access to higher forms of learning and even to liberation? So that does not cut it off, right? Also, Pratyaksha, that is direct sensory experience, without reasoning is also incomplete, because you have to interpret what you see, right? You could be hallucinating, right? So both these pramanas, while they're important, they cannot be held to be final in terms of assessing the nature of reality. So because dharma is not perceptible that way. Dharma is not something which can be accessed through sensory organs. Therefore, the only source of authority that dharma has is the Shastra. And where does the whole canon of Shastric literature, where does that derive its authority? It derives it from the Vedic corpus, the Vedic, the core texts, the Shruti. And the Shruti, again, if it is again based on reasoning, then the whole framework collapses. Because then who is to tell where do you draw a line? Where is it that you say that I go this far and no further? Because there is actually no such line in the human universe, in the mental plane, on the mental plane. You just cannot draw a line. So there is a necessity of keeping the Shabda Pramana as the highest authority for any sort of religion or any sort of society to function as per dharma.
Yeah.
Because dharma, if you look at it in the context of what culture really is, I think we discussed about it in the last episode also, that nature, culture, this continuum, as opposed to how the moderns see it as a conflicting forces, it's not a conflicting pair of forces. It is a continuum, and culture is what informs the human mind where to draw a line in a certain context. Because otherwise, if you go by nature, then you become a pashu. You are just an animal. And as the human condition dictates that we have a certain higher aspiration. And that higher aspiration, where does that come from? That only comes from the Shastras. Because you cannot reason your way through it, because there is nothing in your direct experience, in your pratyaksha, in your direct living experience that will give you that source, that stability of thought. So you will have to have some reliance on Shabda Pramana, and that Shabda Pramana cannot be based on reasoning because of what I just mentioned.
Right. Even if we ignore dharma for a second and go by that extension, any ideology, any idea, any philosophy, if it needs a collective implementation, it needs institution, and those institutions need to draw a line based on a consensus of facts or whatever.
No, so it's not consensus. That is the whole claim. It cannot be consensus, because consensus is arbitrary. Today you and I agree on a certain thing. Tomorrow you have a different experience. You come back and say that, no, I don't agree with that position anymore. So the consensus changes. And I have to give in, right? I may still believe in the same thing, yet to make things work. So the human society, if it is organized based on just what we think, then it is doomed, as it is happening today. Right? Because there seems to be no control over where we are headed and what we are doing. Although there is a lot of celebration and a lot of advertising around this progressive march towards whatever utopia we are building.
But that's part of being in a propaganda society.
That's propaganda society, but that's a whole new arena to cover. But I'm saying that you cannot have that kind of, it's not based on consensus. It has to be based on a higher source of authority. If there is no higher source of authority, then we are doomed. That is basically what this whole argument is about.
I think it is very unrelated, but still I'll mention it because intrusively I've been thinking about it. So, if we see the medieval history of India, for example, so there, emerged a certain panth known as the Sikhi panth, and Sikhism emerged as, as a parallel movement against Islamic imperialism or whatever. But it also, as it grew in size, it also became more enmeshed with socio-political struggles within itself. So much so that the last living Guru Gobind Singh Ji, actually made the Guru Granth Sahib as the living Guru, and saying that, this is the highest authority and no one is going to fight for the position of Guruship. And that's how the Khalsa Panth came into picture. So the point being here is that the Gurus, the lineage of Gurus and the Panth did try to have a consensus around who they were. Were they a political force? Were they a religion? Were they a tradition? Because when Guru Nanak Ji started off, he started off as a Vaishnav Sant. And Guru Gobind Singh Ji was, he had a pravatti of a Shakt, since he had martial spirit and whatnot. But eventually he foresaw the future, that with the political forces intervening in the consensus building measures of the community, because it did happen, right? Mughal emperors tried to intervene in the process of electing or selecting a guruship. So he did see the point that even in the consensus building measures, the institutions or the powers which want to drive the conversation in a certain direction, they will intervene. And he foresaw that, I don't know if he knew about the propaganda society or not, but by establishing the Granthas as the living Guru, I think he drove an important point.
Yeah, I will refrain from commenting much on the Sikh tradition because I'm not an insider. And I do believe that, yes, they started off as a Vaishnav movement and there was a lot of bhakti element in it. And then the history is contentious. But I personally do believe that there is a very strong affiliation of the Sikh religion with Dharma, with Sanatan Dharma. But then I leave it at that. I mean, that's my personal belief. But the important distinction here is this, that while Guru Gobind Singh might have decided that from now on it is only the Guru Granth Sahib which is going to dictate or govern the achar vyavhar of the Sikh Samaj. The book itself there are a majority of it at least is attributable to human authorship, right? There are people who have written it, and there is clear link between who they are. Like there's Kabir also in right, and all the various gurus have also written. While the Vedic texts have no human attribution at all. So the human authorship of Sikh literature stands in contrast with the claim of the Hindu tradition, especially the Vedic tradition, that it is authorless, beginningless. Because, and this is a very important point, as I had mentioned, that unless you can establish that there is no authorship, human authorship, the authority itself is in question. And the historical view that, the Vedic literature or the Vedic Samhitas, the mandalas, the various verses, they don't have the names of the rishis mentioned as the authors. They just say that, they were generous or magnanimous about it. It's a very pedestrian explanation. The more philosophical explanation is, of course, the fact that it is deliberately or it is by design not mentioned. Even if a rishi actually channeled that higher knowledge, it happened, let's say a part of the Veda happened through Rishi Angiras. Rishi Angiras is not the author, he is a deliberate exercise, right? So it is not attributed to him because it is not his thoughts. It is not from his own reasoning or from his experience, pratyaksha or that. It is a higher reality. And that Shabda exists forever. So that Shabda existing forever is not a random claim which they just make to prove or to thrust the Veda upon a bunch of oppressed
Dasyus.
It is not that. It has a very profound meaning and implication, and it reflects right throughout in our daily practice, in the anushtanas we take, in the pujas that we do, in the sankalpas that we take, right? Even in the prayogas that happen, because the sounds in the universe, and it even corresponds with very sects or philosophical traditions that are not exactly Vedic. They derive a lot of their authority from the Vedas, and there's a lot of cross exchange of information. But the agamic literature, for example, the tantras, Kashmir Shaiva darshanas, in Kashmir Shaivism, the theory of creation, for example, it talks about two aspects of the highest reality, right? The Shiva Tattva. Highest reality is composed of Prakasha and Vimarsha. Prakasha is the self-glorious light, right? It's everything that it's the luminous being, and the Vimarsha is the eternal sound. Prakasha is the masculine, and Vimarsha is the feminine. That is who we know as. Further down, we know as the Bhagavati. And Vimarsha is that self-reflection of the highest state of consciousness. That self-reflection happens via Shabda, via sound. And those primordial sounds inform the mantras, and they become the bija mantra. And that bija mantra is eternal. It is eternal sound. And even in the Varnamala of Indian languages, you have in Hindi, for example, you have the Varnamala from A, I, E, then you have the Vyanjan, Ka, Kha, Ga, Gha, Cha, Cha, Cha. So the first letter of each, like the ka, cha, ta, ta, pa. These sounds are the eternal sounds, right? We talk about pranav, right? Om. Where does that come from? This is the eternal. WhatsApp forwards पे आता रहता है ना. It is वो सारे अंकल लोग देखते हैं कि हाँ हमारे धर्म में दिया हुआ है. वो नासा ने रिकॉर्ड किया
स्पेस में
कि ओम आवाज आ रहा है. तो the point is that without caricaturing all that, the point is that these sounds are eternal in nature. That is the basis of our entire praxis. And when you utter a mantra and you repeat it over and over again, and you do a certain anushtana, and you in tantras you do all kinds of methods are there. The Purushcharan, the whole thing, that cycle that you go through, that repetition again and again connects you with that primordial pulsation. In the Kashmir Shaiva Darshan, it is called Sphota. It is the pulsation of the universe, the spanda. So that spanda, that vibration, is expressed. The various forms of that vibration are these sounds, ka. And why is it ka and not kha is also interesting. And I found that in the writings of Karpatri Maharaj himself, where he says that ka itself is not dependent. It is an independent utterance. Like you say, just the sound k is, you don't have to use the vocal cords. Like cha, you don't have to use the vocal cords. It is just that original sound itself.
So where does it come from? Like it's in nasal?
It's basic. No, basically how your tongue touches the. I mean, this is all taught in the traditional. Even in Vyakaran, it is taught how sounds are generated in the human body. A human body is like a yantra, right? And these mantras are intrinsic to our yantra. And these sounds, when they are generated, the first alphabets of these chains, like ka, cha, ta, ta, po. These are the original eternal sounds, and the others are derived from it, and they are not considered eternal. Like ka is eternal, kha is not, because kha has emphasis, and you use the wind from your windpipe to accentuate that sound. So the original is only the eternal.
Very interesting.
So it's such again a deep science that it needs attention, and it needs an open-minded understanding, a consideration to be able to understand it. It is not obvious. You're not reading a newspaper. You're talking about something which is the fundamental, with the foundational basis of everything that you do and believe. So you have to really take the trouble of getting down to the basics, which unfortunately is not happening.
So you have talked about the Bij mantras and the Bij varnas mentioned in the Vedas, but it also is interesting that many traditional paramparas have considered the entire language of the Vedas as distinct in itself. That when we think of the traditional literature, we think, oh, it's written in Sanskrit, but it's been classified, even from a very secular historical point of view, Sanskrit has been classified into various stages of development. So, we say that we have a primitive Sanskrit, then, the high culture Sanskrit of the Upanishadic era, then the Pauranic Sanskrit is there, then Tantric Sanskrit is there. Then we have the Bhakti era, Rudrashtakam type, Sanskrit language being used by Tulsidas, where even though the mantras are written in Sanskrit, but the rhythm of it is very Avadhi-esque. So there is a huge linguistic development. But cutting across these periods, all of the traditional gurus have accepted that the language of the Vedas is distinct in itself. It's not Sanskrit.
And it has been preserved that way, no?
Yeah.
That's the whole idea, that you cannot just download Rigveda.pdf and read it and claim that you have understood it. Because, like you said in your earlier remarks, that you have to approach the Vedic texts, the Vedic knowledge, through the Vedangas. The Vedangas are the limbs of the Veda Purush, right? And so, unless you have mastered the Vedangas, the Vedic knowledge is locked to you. If you don't understand Chandas, if you don't understand the rituals as described in the Kalpa, if you don't understand what each word, the etymology as described in the Nirukta, if you don't understand how the word breaks down and where is it derived from, what is the source, if you don't understand Vyakarana, right, then how can you actually make sense of what is written there? Then they are just parables and vague stories of something, some battles happening somewhere, which is how it is approached in the modern times. So, to access the knowledge of the Veda, a reading of it is not enough. A guided reading of it is also not enough. You cannot teach Veda in a modern school, as some neo movements have tried to do. You cannot teach it in a modern school. It has to be essentially a very traditional Gurukul-like setup where you take the time to first make the student an adhikari of that knowledge by training him in the various branches, and then then slowly the knowledge will reveal itself. The vidya will reveal itself, and that I think is pretty straightforward. That shouldn't be very difficult to understand. But there is a tendency among people to think that Veda is just these are like old people who have written something and they were primitive. This is how we have been brought up in modern education. They were primitive and they don't. I mean, it's you read it because now you are so advanced and you have done engineering or medicine or whatever, BA, LLB, and now you can just access anything from the previous eras and master it because those guys were primitive. That's the assumption with which we go through it, but that is not how it is. And even when historians who are trained in history, when they approach the tradition and the Vedic corpus, they are not the adhikaris. They don't have the capability and the eligibility to actually write their treatise on and be taken seriously. I mean, of course they can write, but no one in their right minds would actually think that is an authoritative description or an analysis or a commentary on the tradition.
At least by the traditional acharya system, it won't be accepted as authoritative.
I'm saying from an emic perspective, from the perspective of the Hindu Dharma. If you call yourself a Hindu, this much information is absolutely essential. Who do you take as an authority that you take their commentary seriously? Take the case of Pashubali, for example. I mean, everyone has their own opinion, right? And that is based on what? That is based on their own biases. This is how they believe it should be. But all traditional commentaries endorse Pashubali, except the neo, these last 100, 200 years, jo usme hua. No one really questions that. No traditional acharya, even those acharyas who developed anukalpas and who said that, okay, we will not go for Pashubali because this is too violent for today's sensibilities. We will cut a loki instead of an animal. Even they endorse Pashubali in principle. May not do that in practice. But that is because they all agree because they've been trained in the same way, right? They are all masters in these subjects, and then when they read the subject in question, they understand it in the same way. So there are differences between schools in praxis, in philosophy, in speculation, but all of them, that is all the Bheda in Anuman, in the inference, right? That is the whole point. But the Shabda is never in question.
Aptavakyas are always ultimate.
Yes.
So now it's around, I don't know. In the modern times, if it is safe to say that instead of adhering to an authority, people want the authority to endorse our personal desires.
Correct.
Right. And Vedic institutions are, of course, incapable of doing that.
Yes.
Like especially
they are averse to doing that.
They are averse to, yes.
They will not do it.
So for that kind of environment, so how is it even possible for people to accept the authority of the Vedas?
No, it is not a question of possibility or not. First, you have to understand what that authority really means, and then I don't think that there is much to debate. Unfortunately, the standard of education over the centuries has gone so down that today you and I, we are not even a patch on our ancestors in terms of what we know, how we look at things. Wisdom to chhod do. We are all murkhas. So, the first thing that we need is epistemic humility. To say that, these are things that are much beyond us. And I'll give you an example in ordinary life in the modern times. How many of us really know how a microprocessor functions, or how a computer, when you look at Windows, how the operating system operates, right? Everyone uses the phone. Can people actually code, and can anyone claim that outside of a minuscule minority who's technically trained in this, can anyone make the next version of Android for their own phone? No, right? So you trust the authority of the people who know the subject, and it more often happens to be science. The scientists are supposedly the highest authority in most of the things because technology is derived from science, right? So because we live in this technopoly where, by the definition of the term itself, culture has surrendered to technology, we are comfortable with the idea that when it comes to technology, we will take the authority, the Shabda authority of whoever is behind it as the final word. यार उसको पता ही होगा ना, जिसने बनाया उसको पता होगा, ठीक ही होगा. How do we know that these are not like what happened now in Lebanon? How do we know that these are not every phone is not inserted with a explosive device, and that you can't if someone wants, they can just trigger that and you'll have billions of injuries and deaths at a single moment. We don't know, but we trust the system. We say that okay, nahi hoga. But when it comes to our own tradition, which is even more, even deeper, even higher. This talks about transcendental realities. This talks about eternal realities. It talks about divinity. Somehow we are okay with the idea that we will figure it out ourselves. And this is a very Protestant attitude, which comes from epistemic arrogance. You believe that you can actually use your limited brain, your mind, to figure out the universe. That is not going to happen. That is simply an impossibility. And when that happens, when you come with that attitude, you say that, how can I take the authority of that person? How can I say that Vedas are the authority? Of course you will have to. How do you know that God exists? Because the Shastras tell you that God exists. How do you know? I mean, Karpatri ji makes that point in his book also, that all these people who say that, we cannot take Veda as a pramana because, it is written by someone somewhere, or it is Shabda hai. How do we know that this is the fun? How do you know that Sri Ram existed? How do you know that Sri Krishna existed? There is no material evidence for it, no? There might be some speculation or speculative evidence that historians will come up and they'll fight each other and say that, हमने राखी गढ़ी में excavate किया और वहां से हमें ये मिला और उससे हमें पता चलता है कि महाभारत का war हुआ होगा, right? But no one can actually claim that they have material evidence for the existence of Sri Ram. And even if there is some evidence for existence of Sri Ram, how do you know that he was God? All that comes from Shastra. And if you are willing to live your life as per those principles and say that, okay, I am a bhakta of Sri Ram, as was evident in the recent Ayodhya ke inauguration, that lakhs of people were moved. I mean, crores of people were moved and excited about it. So are those crores of people, do they have any evidence other than the Shastra for the existence of Sri Ram? So the Shastra is the Pramana. There is no question about it.
But that is a very emotional statement, because men would say that even if we remove the faith from the equation, how can we be so sure that Vedas don't have any authorship? It's a question of establishing the basic principles that if Vedas are indeed free from human authorship, then why weren't they able to predict the future? Let's say.
That is not the point of the Veda. No? It is not a book of prophecies. The tradition, the Vedic tradition, is about the pursuit of the Purushayarthas. It enables you, and I'm speaking as an insider to the Hindu tradition. I'm no expert on the Vedas, so I cannot claim that this is what is there and this is not there. All I'm saying is that, having inherited the entire tradition and being faithful to that tradition, I know for a fact that the purpose of an individual's life is the fulfillment of the 4 Purusharthas, and the Veda is the ultimate authority from which different ways of practice can be derived for you to live a life of dharma and to make your life better here and in the hereafter. That is what dharma is about.
Add meaning to your existence.
Not just meaning, even material comforts. Even kama is a valid purushartha as long as it is in the boundaries of artha, and artha is a very valid purushartha as long as it is in the realm of dharma. Adharmic kama or adharmic artha is a no-no, and that information, that guideline, where does that come from? That comes from the Vedic.
So the infallibility of Vedas is a crucial cornerstone for existence of Hindu civilization.
Yes, absolutely.
But the infallibility of Vedas is being attacked in the name of Hindu civilization to move ahead. That अगर हमें आगे बढ़ना है तो let's say for example कि वर्ण जाति व्यवस्था खत्म करनी है, बट वर्ण जाति व्यवस्था का बेसिक कहाँ से इन्फ्लुएंस आता है? वो वैदिक वाङ्मय से आता है. या फिर हिंदू जो है वो एक धर्म नहीं है, हिंदू एक जाति है. सो सबका डीएनए एक, जो आजकल जो आर्ग्यूमेंट है, that argument is basically in opposition to the infallibility of the religion.
Yes.
Religion is indeed fallible, and that is why we need to ethnicize the population.
Yes. That is basically a Nastika argument. So if you are making that claim, if you are saying that there is no divinity in the Shastra, that there is no eternality to the Veda, there is no infallibility to the Veda, and the Veda is not even a pramana, and that we can actually we can go and change stuff there, like a lot of people have. There is the Arya Samaj who have a version of Manusmriti called Vishuddha Manusmriti, where they have purged the original text of all that they found inconvenient. So what I was referring to earlier, in the sense of the scheme of the pramanas, what they've done is that they have completely done away with the Shabda pramana, and they have used their yukti, their reasoning, to say that okay, this is okay and this is not, because this is convenient or this makes sense to me, this does not, so this must be an interpolation, isko hata do. Ye kaise ho sakta hai? But that debate can continue. I mean, between the traditionalist side and the rebel side, that debate can always will continue forever, because that is the nature of reasoning. There will never be a finality. आपने कितना भी अच्छा कोई तर्क दे दिया हो, उससे अच्छा तर्क अगला दे देगा, इसमें कोई मुश्किल नहीं है. But so if it is just based on tark, which is reasoning, then you have what is called modernity, where there is nothing final. And today in the propaganda society, you even have efforts by institutions, respectable institutions, to normalize degenerate behavior like pedophilia, right? You can search on the internet, and you will find many articles in respected outlets, media outlets, which talk about some paper somewhere, this group of scientists has done this way, and pedophilia is on account of this. So why not have a conversation about that? This is how they normalize stuff. So there is no line that you can draw, because reasoning will not allow you to draw that line. Reasoning is ever shifting, it's a flux. So for a culture to define itself and to say that this is this and no further. That is what the definition of culture is. That line, that Lakshman Rekha, has to come from a source of authority which is based on the Shabda Praman. And Vedas are that Shabda Praman, and their eternality is what makes them that highest authority.
So I was saying that, the reason why we are having this conversation is that because all of the rectification, the editing, the correction of the historical wrongs,
The
reformation, this is being done by modern Hindus in the name of moving or peddling the Hindu civilization ahead in the future. And I think this is one of the frontiers, the infallibility of the Vedas. If this is lost, then what is there to defend?
Yeah, correct.
Everything is open to perpetual doubt. Everything is open to interpretations.
And that is the nature of the times that we live in. Everything is in question. That higher critical method of analyzing text. What is it? Right. It is doubting forever. You will never arrive at a place of stability. And what that implies for your personal journey itself, if you have a journey, is that you will never graduate to action. Because your action is reserved for propaganda. If you live in a propaganda society, you are exposed to multiple streams of propaganda acting on you, forcing you to do things that you wouldn't otherwise, persuading you and to channelize your energy towards commercial, political, or some vested interest. So your action is reserved for that. And you are kept busy speculating on the meaning of life eternally, from moment you are born to death. And you will never arrive at a sense of equilibrium where you say that, okay, now I can now move and do something about it, right? And that is the whole point. So the other thing which I got reminded when you were talking about is what you brought to my attention. Is the very name Shastra, which is derived from Shasan itself. It is related to Shasan, which is to rule. So Shastra itself, etymologically, means what governs you, what rules you, right? What rules your life. And you're questioning that in questioning the infallibility of the Veda.
So in that sense, the infallibility of the Vedas is the existential cornerstone for Hindus. Yes. The real cornerstone for Hindus. Like many people say that, we do face demographic challenges with all infallibility.
Look, philosophically speaking, yes. I don't think that a lot of Hindus would be interested or inclined or maybe not even capable of grasping the philosophical, because everyone does not have, I'm not saying this in a patronizing way, but not everyone is philosophically inclined. So they're not really worried about what the philosophical literature says or what the philosophical claims of the tradition are. They're not worried about that. But those who are, the onus is upon them to actually figure this out and to internalize it if they call themselves Hindu. Those that are the so-called intellectuals, even if they don't have the exposure or if they are not fortunate, like we are not fortunate to have gone through the entire Vedic education. Most people around us are like that. And if those people who are intellectually inclined don't take the trouble of familiarizing themselves with these arguments, then the better idea as per me, is for them to shut up or get familiarized. Don't spread nonsense in the name of philosophy. It's not what you are thinking. That is the basic premise.
I think for normal people, we should not make it too convenient that it's high philosophy and that's why we should not touch it. I think the point that you made earlier ago, that the divinity of gods is being linked with the infallibility of the Dharma Shastras. But now there is a divorce in the thinking process of the normal Hindu, that they are very much emotional about the divinity of Rama, but they are not very much so faithful towards the source, the infallible source of that divinity. So at the same time, when people consider Rama as divine, they may have a gumption of doubt when it comes to accepting the infallibility of the Vedas. And that is the point I was taking to underline. Right?
Yeah, that's because because Ram as such, the worship of Ram is a popular activity. You visit temples. It doesn't require you to think through stuff, right? You just take it as you grow, and it's part of your culture, your upbringing, and you start doing that. So you do it rather unthinkingly. The danger is that if later on in life, and that danger is very visible all around us, because people from very normal Hindu families, from smaller towns and villages, when they end up in bigger cities, suddenly they meet people who don't have that same kind of upbringing, and they're practically atheists. They're like, the West. They're almost Westerners in how they think and feel and behave. And then they start questioning their fundamental beliefs. And that is when these people lose their bearing. They almost, it's tragic what happens to them. And then they become more atheist than the atheist himself, because then they think that everything is a lie. And it's a huge crisis of sorts. It's a crisis of meaning. It's an existential crisis for them. And then they either adopt some political philosophy like communism. You see this happening in JNU all the time, right? That
नया मुसलमान ज़्यादा अल्लाह अल्लाह करता है,
ज़्यादा प्याज खाता है, सभी बोलते हैं.
Now that reminds me of the confrontation of the Vedic mind with other traditions, both religious and secular. So while we may agree on the infallibility of the Vedas, there are also traditions existing both in India and outside, and those traditions which came to India from outside. They also claim the infallibility of their scriptures and their God. So let's say the tradition of the Quranic tradition or the biblical tradition, or let's say even the entire the Judeo-Christian framework of New and Old Testament, they also consider their position as infallible. So what makes it different from the infallibility of the Vedas?
Yeah, so one of the things that एक जो भ्रम है हिंदू समाज में, वो ये है कि they are people of the book and we are free to do what we want. That attitude itself brings a lot of contempt from, let's say, the Muslims, who are very clear about their own fundamentals. A practicing Muslim believes the Quran, believes in the supremacy of the Quran, and therefore he doesn't have any doubts about it. And that reflects in their daily life, in how they get organized, in how they will stand for the cause of their religion, regardless of where they are. It happens in Europe, it happens in India, it happens anywhere, you name it. वो संगठन की जो शक्ति उनकी है, that comes from that conviction.
That spirit of hostile enclave in that liberal universe.
Yeah, correct. So hostile, that adjective hostile comes from the contents of what they believe in. But I'm removing that qualifier of whether it is hostile or whether it is peaceful. Just the fact that they're able to organize and align themselves towards a common goal is on account of that belief in their scripture. But how that... So, Swami Karpatri ji in his book on Vedon ka Swarup, Ved ka Swarup or Pramanya, in that he talks about this attitude of the Hindus. And he says that, look, you guys, if you think that you are better off, that's a huge mistake, because you are actually worse off. These guys at least have something to fall back on. You have nothing, and you are thinking that you are some superior being because you are... He doesn't say it, but it is because Hindus are victims of propaganda, as I said. If you are a communist, you are taking the doctrines of communism, which originate in the thinking of Marx and Engels. That is your authority, right? And your action is geared towards that. So that propaganda, that communist propaganda, communism is an ideology. That ideology is actually driving you to do what you think is right. And in the case of, if you call yourself a Hindu, what is that authority which will get you to commit to action? वो क्या action होगा, वो मैं उसके बाद आता हूँ. But the difference between the Vedic and these Semitic religions, for example, their claims is again in the eternality, in the non-human authorship. Although the Quran also says that it is not authored by humans, but you can trace the verses of the Quran to a single person in history, right, who is supposed to be the author, the prophet, right? So their prophet is the one who actually authored the Quran. Although their insiders' claim is that it is the voice of Allah. Similar, but not the same. So there is historicity there. In case of the Old Testament, for example, you have Joshua and David and Moses. All these are human authorship, attributed by the tradition themselves to these. They may be Mahapurushas, but they are still humans. And so that human authorship angle is there. So historicity, human authorship. Then we come to the fact that what is there in that? What is in those books? So these books are, they advocate for action which is not particularly Dharmic from our standpoint, right? I mean, from our, obviously, because we are Dharma people, so we will look at it from the lens of Dharma. So we will not consider what is written in the Quran as Dharmic, obviously. If it is okay for someone to kill someone who is not of the same ethnicity, I don't think that we, in our moral universe, we can ever reconcile with that, right? So it is not something that comes from the divine. It is something that has to be rejected. We will intuitively reject it. But the most important part, I think, is the nature of these religions, and it comes again from their scriptures, is their evangelical approach, except for Judaism, which is not, but let's say Christianity, Islam, and all the secular ideologies, they all go out of their way to convert people and to make them who they are. And once they convert someone, that person attains the same status theoretically, although in practice it is not the case. If there is someone who is lowborn or not from a great background,
non-Arabs,
so they are treated differently, but that is in practice. But let's say theoretically they become the same. So there is no adhikar bhed in these traditions, while in the Vedas it is very much there. So first of all, there is no instinct to go out and convert. Now, a lot of people, looking at it politically, will say that this is a suicidal attitude. Now, whether it is suicidal or not, we'll leave it to another day, but it is foundational. And that is why we are who we are. That we don't go out of our way and say that, oh, we will go and convert everyone and make them like us, because making them like ours is not a simple matter. Secondly, the fact that the Vedas or the foundations of our Dharma come from sources which are non-human. This is eternal sources. Even the adhikar of that, of who is a Vedika, comes from that, from the eternal source, comes from divinity itself. And by virtue of that, it means that you cannot simply become it. You have to be granted that adhikar by higher powers. And how does that happen? It happens only through the reality of birth. So if you are born in the Vedic, in a Vedic kula, then you are a Vedika. If you are not, then you are not. But that does not mean, coming back to the political question of it, that does not mean that you cannot make someone a Hindu, right? There are several sects, right? You can still, like the Vaishnavas, they go out and, convert people to Vaishnavism. And again, Karpatri Maharaj, he says in this text that the Vaishnava and the Shaivas, they are, always at each other and saying that, so they'll convert them back, right? This keeps happening over history. They said that is fine, but this is all human. But to get access to the Vedic system of knowledge, it has to come from something non-human. It has to be divine. And that divinity can only express itself through the reality of birth. So that is why there is the finality of birth. Looking at it again from a more speculative point of view and contextualizing it to the current realities, this also makes sense in a different way. And I had written a post about it long back on Twitter, that today technology has reached a size and it has so much power that it can change who you are. You can actually go down to the level of the DNA also, right? People today, they go for sex change operations, right? And if a male becomes a female, today the only argument against it is that it will be difficult, you will be confused, because science or technology has not advanced so much that it removes all problems. But let's say 10 years down the line, technology is adept at completely making it safe, and anyone can become anyone. So then there is no longer the biological, your biological sex is no longer a final imperative. You can always change it. Likewise, tomorrow, technology may so advanced that you can even become a dog, right? And, if you can just do a thought experiment, this is very much possible if technology proceeds in that direction. So the question is, where do you draw the line? And the tradition says, the Vedic tradition says that birth is that line. And why is that birth the line? Because it is where you have stopped intervening in matters of karma. And that karma phala is granted to you by the divine, by higher powers. And so you leave it at that and you accept the circumstances of your birth. Does not mean that you are condemned to a life of penury or oppression. But it simply means that your identity is intrinsically related to who you were born as, and that you have to work your way around it and aspire for a better birth. Like, for example, I am speaking personally, not as a, just to clarify the example, that if I am born as a Brahmin and I did not have the fortune, I was not fortunate to go to a Gurukul, if I am so inclined, I can organize my life in such a way that I earn enough merit in this life that in the next life I can. But I can't go today and make the claim that because I am born a Brahmin, I am an expert in Vedas, or that you admit me into a Gurukul. That will not happen. My adhikara is gone. I've missed the bus in this lifetime. So the finality of birth, accepting that finality does not, as I said, does not mean that it is acceptance of everything that happens to you. That's a wrong reduction of this principle. It simply means that you accept the eternality of life itself, and that you are caught in this cycle of birth and rebirth, and that you are, currently you have a limited agency and you have very little free will, and that exercise of that free will get you to a better place. So that much acceptance, I don't think, is unreasonable. It is logical. It is, and it is also edifying, because it makes you humble. It changes the way you look at things. It changes the way you approach knowledge. And like we said, perhaps in the previous episode, I don't remember, but the question of adhikara itself. Adhikara does not translate to rights. That's a very alien vocabulary. The meaning of adhikara is twofold. It is capacity and it is eligibility. So capacity of doing something and eligibility. So when I was giving my personal example, that even if you're born as a Brahman, I may be eligible to go to a Ved Pathshala now, or maybe not. I don't know what the formal rules are. I have missed the bus, as I said. But at this age, I may not even have the capacity, because my mind is already formed. I can't go through that rigor anymore. So I have lost that adhikara. Similarly, whatever you are doing, there is the element of adhikara associated with it. And what differentiates us as Hindus from Abrahamics or from the Judeo-Christian tradition or from their secular counterparts is this whole idea of adhikara. Because you have to recognize that idea of adhikara. It comes from sources higher than you, and it is not something that you wear on your sleeves, that you self-certify yourself with. That, no, why can I not do it? You cannot do it because, that's how it is. So accepting that and becoming more humble, I think is a very healthy, it would be a very healthy trend in Hindu society also to accept that fact. Yeah.
So you want to add something from Karpatri ji's literature?
No, I think everything that I said was in some way or the other inspired by his literature only. But let's see if we can find something which is. I would just, my whole submission to whoever watches our videos is that they can, if they are familiar with Hindi, because most of Swami Karpatri's writings happen to be in Sanskrit. Not many people can read Sanskrit. Those who do are already familiar with it. But if you can read Hindi and you can take the trouble of actually going through some of his books, then you're doing yourself a great favor. Don't go by what is written about him on social media, what many great intellectuals say about him. I'll give you a small example, that the blame or that attribution of flat earther to him is so cheap. It's so unfortunate that Hindus end up speaking blatant lies about and misrepresenting it. That is how propaganda is. What he said there was not that he endorses the idea of flat earth. He is countering the Arya Samaji view, which claims that our literature, the Vedas, conceptualize the earth as a sphere. So he's rebutting them, and he's being intellectually honest and saying that no, the Vedic literature does not say that. The Vedic literature has no endorsement of the earth as a sphere. It talks about the earth as a loka, and you are unnecessarily making it into a sphere. He's not talking about his personal view. He's not commenting on science. He was extremely well read, and he knew science better than most of his critics. And he knew Western philosophy better than most of his critics. So when he says that, it is not an endorsement of flat earth. Likewise, so many things are spoken about him, and the best way to correct your misinformation is to actually read him directly. I'll just read one part and see if this inspires even one or two people to take up that. I was talking about the Vaishnav and Shaiv thing. ब्राह्मण क्षत्रिय आदि द्विजाति वेदाधिकारियों से भिन्न कोई किसी भी तरह भी द्विजाति या वेदाधिकारी नहीं बनाया जा सकता. शैव भरसक वैष्णवों को शैव बना लेते हैं, वैष्णव भी भरसक शैवों को वैष्णव बना लेते हैं. अतः यहां भी शैवत्व और वैष्णवत्व मनुष्य के अधीन है, परंतु वैदिकता या द्विजातित्व किसी भी प्रकार मनुष्य के अधीन नहीं हो सकते। वैदिक धर्म में ब्राह्मण क्षत्रिय या क्षत्रिय ब्राह्मण नहीं बन सकता। फिर वेद बाह्य ब्राह्मण आदि बन जाएं और वैदिक हो जाएं, इसकी तो चर्चा ही क्या। So even if you read this part without going through the entire chapter, you were likely to think that what he's talking about is, he's being regressive and all that. That is not his claim. He's already made it clear that you can become a Hindu. I mean, Vaishnavas can make other people Vaishnavas because that is based on a human agency. This is like claim to something. This is a human claim. And Shaivas likewise can do the same thing, that you bring people and you give them practices. Like my own Sampradaya, traditionally we come from the Kashmir Shaiv Parampara. There is no bar on initiating foreigners. Swami Lakshmanju famously initiated so many foreigners. But let us not defile what is the pristine Vedic system. And by that, I don't defilement, before people accuse me, I don't mean defiling by including so-called low caste or whatever. I'm saying there is a system, there is an epistemology, there is a deep thought behind it. Defiling it with our biases is something that we should totally avoid. And I hope that we can, as we go further, because this is a learning process for us also. And as we read further, we may want to do another episode on this particular topic about the Apaurusheya nature of the Vedas and their eternality and their non-human authorship. Maybe we can do a part 2, part 3, or make a whole series out of it. But for now, I think we've conveyed the point, hopefully.
I think like the key takeaway from this entire exercise for our viewers would be that to accept some principles as first principles without questioning it and considering it as the cornerstone of your faith.
Yes.
If you consider your gods as divine, then you have to accept the infallibility of the scriptures.
Just to nitpick, Aditya,
Achha.
these are not principles.
Oh.
These are beyond principles, because principles is also human act. Principles come from reasoning. So again, going back to Karpatri Maharaj, he says that reasoning can always strengthen the persuasiveness of the Shabda Pramana. But Shabda Pramana is a swataha Pramana. It does not depend, it's independent. And so its validity is not dependent on reasoning, its persuasiveness may be dependent on it. So just to nitpick.
No, it's an important correction. So शब्द प्रमाण जो है वो जो है आपके मानवीय क्षमताओं के परे है, वो अनादि है, वो नित्य है, वो जो है परंपरा के थ्रू प्राप्त होता है, उसके अधिकार हैं, उसका अपनी एक व्यवस्था है, वो अपने आप में जो है स्वयंभू है. It is distinct in itself and it does not propel, it does not go ahead of what is thought of as this civilizational perspective. Right. So it is the cornerstone of civilization.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So on that note, I think we can.
It's very well summed up, and thank you for this conversation.
Thank you, Ashish ji, for having this conversation in the first place. I know you are having a tough time, and this is a very valuable time for you. And thanks once again for joining.
Thank you.
Dharm ki jai ho.
Dharm ki jai.